when it came to our first planning grant from Model Cities, after the application was accepted, I then went into planning in October, and I rewrote the whole program myself.
And what did that entail as you rewrote it?
It entailed, well, first of all, becoming familiar with the legislation and the regulations, statutory regulations for what Model Cities was to be and what it could do, what the expectations out of Washington were for it. So the first thing was concern for something called comprehensive planning, and the second thing was citizen participation. So I developed an approach to the program where the model neighborhood area would be divided into three parts. And those three parts were Cold Spring, Fruit Belt, and Ellicott, sometimes called Maston, Fruit Belt, and Ellicott. Each of those segments were called model neighborhood areas, and each of them had representation on the review and referral board, and each of them had committees. Each of them had 10 committees. Each area had the 10 committees from culture, economic development, employment, education, health, housing, public safety, recreation, social services, transportation, right down the line. With the 10 components, we had 30 residents on the review and referral board and 10 people appointed by the mayor, so that review and referral board, which became the oversight board for our planning, consisted of 40 people. The residents were not expected to set up a new city hall. That was a big fear. The residents were expected to respect the power situation in the city. I think I mentioned to you that Ned Reagan, who was a councilman at that time from Delaware District, and he ultimately became the Erie County executive, and then later on went on to New York City and became New York State Comptroller, said to me, "You're trying to take power from the Common Council. It'll never happen." Well, it shocked me. I didn't know power. What kind of power are they talking about? All I knew was that I was hoping that we'd be able to develop a program which would meet some of the desired needs of those who were participating in the model neighborhood area to improve the quality of their lives. It hadn't been improved up to that point in time. The people who were officers in the city government hadn't found a way to help the people, so now the people are going to help themselves. And that was my fight. Self-determination.
They were interested in the program because they could see it as a community developing operation. They came to us, offered us sponsorship, and we were the first contract to be signed under the Model Cities program, in which we received quite an substantial funding, and we set up a market over on William Street, 300 William Street it was. We actually set up a full, what would have been a medium market, but we sold all the things that any other grocery store sells. We had a meat department, we had frozen department, we had canned goods department, we had bread department, we had everything, and we still continued our bagging operation because there were families that profited from those bags because it was a lower price meal, and it really took care of a weekend meal for a family.
relations in the world, which we have had ever since.
That's on camera.
All right, go ahead. We've had good relations. We've had a few troublemakers around, a few agitators. And if a leader gets up and he screams about police brutality, he gets an audience. This is what they want to hear.
They might.
Why?
Chief?
I don't know.
What's more, Ralph? Chief, what? They're taking somebody. Yeah, we better get on to it.
Right around that time, in '67, I was developing a hypothesis about how the arts could necessarily contribute to these ills. In what way can artists develop a consciousness about social change? Upon graduation with my undergraduate degree, I began to think about developing an arts center here in Buffalo, New York. I came in contact with Ollie Anderson, who was a very important artist in our community. Clarence Scott, who I've gone to school with at the university. We both graduated with our degrees in art. We came up with a proposal that we thought was a solid proposal for model cities. We understood at that time that model cities was on the verge of receiving federal monies, and that we thought that a big shot of federal money would help us at least get started with our program. Given this idea that we had been working on for over a year, we had to kind of figure out a way in which to present that knowledge to the community, who basically were not really cognizant of art, let me put it that way. The African Cultural Center had existed, and primarily their function was theater. So then there was a sort of a piece set in place to at least to sensitize the community about art. We submitted our proposal to the city of Buffalo, and through the Model Cities program, I had to go down to present our project in hearings with the city council.
And how did that come off?
That came off very well. We got a lot of support for the idea and the concept. And so when we sat down and finally got the building, we began to do some further planning. We had to identify, had some visual identification with this building, a name which would somehow permeate throughout the community. And we threw around a number of names of, we felt first of all that we should dedicate the space to a living or a past artist, someone who was known by the community. And we came up with the idea of Langston Hughes, because Langston Hughes was a Renaissance writer. His name was very well known, and a lot of people have read his material. And we thought it would be appropriate to name the building after him. And we had discovered too that Langston Hughes' name was used in other cities for very similar programs. And so it was a kind of a natural. At that time he was a very popular writer, and people made connections with him. And we had to sit down and think about how, first of all, ask ourselves the question, if model cities were to die tomorrow, where would we be? So we had to sit down and develop a comprehensive 5-year plan, which was really requested by the New York State Council on the Arts, because we were still getting money from them. We were getting money from private corporations, foundation grants. Community folk were donating money. And so we had to kind of figure out ways in which to identify sources that would allow us to stay beyond the Model Cities framework, to keep us going so that we could eventually be self-sufficient. because a lot of people at that time were very skeptical. They couldn't understand how art could be a business. They could not understand that they couldn't make the connection between an artist and the business world, and we had to kind of bridge that gap by showing them that, you know, the center could be self-sufficient, it could be profitable, and that we didn't need to have other types of funding from other entities to keep us sufficient. So the 5-year program really developed in stages. The first year would to implement the visual arts and to get those going. In the second and third years, we would incorporate the performing arts aspects of it, the dance. The inner city ballet came into the center and paid rent, and that helped to offset some of the administrative costs, heating, electricity, etc. We then still were getting grants, so the portion of those monies were being used to help to keep the capital costs intact. For example, the city came in and they looked at the building and said, well, you've got to meet certain codes. So we had to build a stairwell, and I think that cost us $25,000. So we had to go out and get money to cover those costs. We had to have put windows in. We had to comply with the safety concerns that the city had registered, because you have to remember that the city still owned the building. Urban Renewal Agency had ownership over the building. And we negotiated a very small amount of money for rent for that, so that the rental fees weren't so burdensome, and that we could put all the money into the building and into the programming. So by the end of that 5-year period, we saw ourselves as being self-sufficient in ways that we could then not depend so heavily on the behest of the grant funding agencies.
Model cities became a strong, positive program in this community, and there was a need to do something connected to employment. We set up office at 563 Jefferson Avenue, and it was we had a staff of about probably 30, 40 people, counselors, job developers, clerical people, and we will hire people from the community. And I know I don't jump on a soapbox about it, but I'm going to tell you. The people who, and there's something about the attitude that people had then, and with their opportunity to work, that people just got immersed in the work. And we were not looking for people who had master's degrees. We're not looking for people who hold a degree. We just wanted people who were committed to trying to make a change in our community and try to make things happen for people who could not make it. And those are the kind of people we look for, and we found a whole lot of them. A lot of them. Part of my mission, as I saw it, was to, if you're going to work in model cities, if you're going to work in this project with me, if you don't have a high school diploma, you got to enroll in high school equivalency program. If you don't have a college degree, you are going to go out to the University of Buffalo. We set up special programs with the university where the people who worked in model cities could get credits for their work experiences, which encouraged a lot of them to go back to college. And a lot of them who now have college degrees, who worked in model cities, would not have gotten them under any other circumstances. You know, I feel good about that. And I know there's one man who that stands out. That was Mr. Davis. Mr. Davis has passed. W.A. Davis. He was a steel worker. Lived on Headley. Hired him as a counselor. He did not have a high school equivalency, but he had good people skills. So we brought him in, and we hired him. And Mr. Davis had a profound effect on the way that this program went because of his ability to interface with the people who we were trying to get placed on the different jobs. And he had the capacity to get them to do things because, he was an older man, very knowledgeable of the industry, very, very people-like. And Mr. Davis was not single-handedly, but had a great deal of influence on how successful that project was. But he's an example of one who came to us who did not have his high school equivalency because he wanted it. He went back to work. He went back to the high school equivalency program. He's working his regular job full time, working with us full time. And I don't know how he did it, but he did it. So most of those people who worked in model cities ended up improving their educational background, which increased their salability for the job market.
I used to work out of the North Jefferson Library as, quote, the community coordinator. I had time to be involved in the community. Join and go was my motto. Join and go. You join up with agencies and you go. It didn't make any difference whether it was 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock in the morning. I mean, I didn't have a real time thing. I just had to keep up with all of the demands on me at that time. The opportunity was there to come up with something innovative and have an opportunity to provide library services to the community. And I applied through the library. They asked me to apply for a grant, which was an LSCA grant, they called it, Library Services and Construction Act grant. And the idea behind that was to provide services that weren't being provided, to see what kind of library activities you could provide a community that weren't being provided. It was called a 3Bs program: bars, beauty shops, and barber shops. When you go into, when you go to the barber shop, everybody knows everything in the barber shop. You can go in there and the cat will know something about everything in the world, and when it comes down to it, don't know much about anything. And it was always an argument when you go into the place. Everybody was arguing about the world record in this and the smallest animal. I mean, it didn't make any difference. It was all over the place. So I decided then that, here's a place where we can put some information in. So I created the 3B program where we put reference material like the World Almanac, the Guinness Book of World Records. I mean, the kinds of activities that they could sit there and actually come up with an answer. And the barber and the person behind there that was serving martinis and all that stuff was the man who was responsible for providing this information to people when they came to a conclusion that they didn't know what they were talking about. And it was quite active, and it was used. It probably, again, it's a long-running project, and it was designed for the same purposes: to take library and information to the community where people were. Model Cities was a very interesting project that I took on, and I applied for a grant and got a grant. Jesse Nash Jr. was the director of Model City, and he thought it was a great idea, and he presented it to the people, and they approved it. What it was, again, it was an idea that if we had an environment that was able to take material, library material out into the community that people could use, it would be like a library on wheels, so to speak. And what I had to do was, again, to design a van and have somebody produce it for me and come up with a product that people wanted to use. The Ram van was designed so that it had air conditioning in it, it had heat in it, it ran it ran all year round, whether it was hot or cold. You could set up about 20 people in it. Small kids, we used to do small kids. You could put 25 of them in there, you know, and they could have a very good time. But the Ram Van was aimed at serving community agencies or helping community agencies that were already in existence with their programming, and at the same time providing an outlet for us to reach the community. And the Rambam Project was started back in the early 70s, 71, 72, I think it was. And it ran, as a matter of fact, the Rambam, I think, is still in the garage at the main library. And along with maybe one other project, it was one of the only ones that survived. The idea behind that I had was to have a product that when Model City's money ran out, it would still be there, and that it would be in use. And so what we did was to put it on wheels, and we took it all up in the community, and people supported it. They loved it, and they used it. We had so many agencies were waiting to use it until we couldn't meet the demand. But the idea was not to have a permanent structure over here that they would have you use while you had the money, but to have a product that would have some longevity to it. And we had a garage down at the main library that would hold it. We had tractor trailers in there, so it was a place, it was an ideal place, and it was a place where they would probably, the library supported it, and it lasted because the library supported it.
Well, we were really concerned about all of the health problems we had was experiencing in our various neighborhoods, and we decided that we had to have certain programs to address those needs. And so out of bringing all these people together, I think that's one of the most wonderful thing about having citizen participation, because the citizens come and they tell you about the problems that they have. They're like another public health arm of the community, or they're the activists in our community. And they come to us and they tell us about the problems and the conditions in their neighborhoods and in their homes, and where they feel as though they lack services. The attitude back during the 60s and 70s and 80s, it was really basically looking at sick care. If you're sick, you go to the hospital. What we advocated was for, if you were healthy, you wouldn't have to go to, if you stayed healthy, you wouldn't have to go to the hospital. So we wanted community-based health centers that would not only take care of emergency type conditions that you had, but also would try to keep you out of the hospital. But the atmosphere then in the health and medical community was sick care, and was always building more hospitals and looking at more inpatients. We were more on the outpatients. We wanted to have people be able to go to a center in their own location within their own community and be able to take their baby or their elderly mother or father to a center where they could receive the same kind of care rather than going to the hospital. So we were on the cutting edge here in Buffalo. There was a Catholic girls' school on Broadway, St. Mary's School. And we bought that building and went in and completely renovated that building at a tune of $1 million. $1 million is a lot of money. And we renovated that building, named it after Jessie Nash, which was the first director of our now Model Cities program. And it stayed open for a number of years, but sponsored by the Erie County Health Department. At that time, we could not get the hospitals to buy into the health center movement. And as you know, years later, they started the HMOs. And that was basically an outgrowth of what Model Cities had done with the health centers here locally. So now you have health centers all over, and you have the HMOs, and you have everyone preaching wellness. Let's stay well now. So we preached those things way back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. Another one of our programs out of the health component was to supply nurses, psychologists, and social workers at Build Academy. And Build Academy at that time was on Clinton Street. And so we had a program there that serviced all those children. And we had Dr. Roderick Charles and Fern Beavers were the two persons who worked in that particular program. And so we funded that program each year. One of our other programs was called the Environmental Health and Responsive Program that was operated out of School 48. And I happened to be the school nurse for that program. And I worked for the program, and what we did is we had services in the school from K through 3rd grade. So if kids were sick, they had me as the nurse. And I worked with the families, I worked with the kids, I did education programs in the schools. And so those were 3 of the major programs that we had. There were others, but those were 3 of the major programs that we had. On the public safety side, we have 1490 Jefferson.
We feel that the 1490 Jefferson has a tremendous potential for not only the youth in Buffalo, but also a method of available job potential, and also for helping the aged and a place for the aged to come.
Mr. Bellamy, what do you plan on doing with this grant here at 1490 Jefferson?
Don, we plan to continue to make the capital improvements for 1490 and still try to bring in as many services as we can in the community and provide jobs, if we can, in the community for people in the community and things along those lines.
Well, Herb was a friend of the Model Cities program. Just first off, the Model Cities program and Herb essentially formed a partnership to do and to spread the work of the 1490 senior citizens programs and other programs in the community. And because 1490 was not only the physical structure as it's become known in terms of a community center, it was a real center of influence in terms of the people who worked there, the agencies that were there. For a while there was a police substation there. So it was like a one-stop place for many services that serve the east side.
Oh, it means just the world to me. I'm just free, get out, and I don't be lonesome. I'm just free.
Oh, it means a lot to me because I like to get out and meet people.
I just love it here because there's so many things I can learn when I come here that I couldn't learn at home.
We were very fortunate to have individuals who were concerned about seniors and about their medical. The fact that they did not have coordinated medical services, and so you found a lot of elderly people that might have been taking 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 different types of pills, and the interaction was creating havoc on their physical health. And so we had nurses that would come out to 1490. We had a nurses' room, which the Practical and Registered Nurses Association staffed for a while and also gave them equipment for that room, blood pressure equipment, and at times they would come in. People from the county would come in, from Social Services Department, Coordinated Care Services would come in. And we made sure that they had transportation because many elderly people wanted to leave home and go to a place where they could participate in playing cards, ceramics, and just have some interaction with their neighbors or with new people. And so it was, for them, it was a way of getting away from their home for a period of time in a safe environment where they didn't have to walk on the streets, and that we could pick them up in a van and drive them to their homes and bring them to the center and also provide a hot meal for them. And so that was one of the things that I think was extremely important during that time, because it was the beginning of recognizing the importance of our ancestors as well as the people who were our mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles who had become elderly and needed some attention. And we provided the staffing, we provided all of the monies to renovate that particular area of 1490, and we provided a lot of other resources to 1490, and so on. That's on the public health side.
I think I got to a point where I felt I'd done as much as I could. My staff had begun to act rather strangely.
How so?
They would, some of my key people would urge me to work more closely with the politicians, for example. That's not me. And I read this, and I said, oh, what's this all about? Some of my key staff persons would ask, well, what does Billy Johnson think about this? Or what does the mayor think about this? I didn't do things that way. That would have been a logical approach. We could have started off that way. Many cities started that way, and they were right in the laps of the elected officials, so that everything they did was done with the full knowledge and the blessings of the elected officials. I just did not operate like that. And as I said to you on the phone, maybe in hindsight, that was not the smartest thing in the world, my approach. But as my staff began to raise questions about how I was doing, they probably felt we were not moving fast enough. Some of them felt we were going too slowly and began to articulate this to me. And I began reading in my staff some changes taking place. I could feel it. And I told you about one of the staff members meeting me at the door one day, looking at his watch. When I came in at 10 o'clock, he goes, I said, well, what the heck is this? And I could understand that. I could understand that. The people wanted to be on the right side. The people wanted to be with the winner. The people wanted to be where the power was. And I clearly wasn't where the power was. I was often fighting the power. And I could see, guys say, man, look what we could have had, man, if you only had it done this. Look what you could have done, man, if you had it only done. I'm looking at these folks. But I think the other thing was that some people got on our staff and convinced other members of the staff that the best way to do things is to work hand in glove with the city and let the city types tell you what to do. And then you just simply be a functionary, or let them know how you're doing, and try to be sure that you have their blessings every step of the way. I just didn't work that way. So it became fairly clear to me that something had happened in the staff, and there was more desire for me to begin working within the existing Democratic political structure. I didn't do that. I wasn't going to do it, and I haven't done it yet. So I felt very, very sad that this was beginning to happen. I think I pinpointed it, think I saw it correctly, and I said it's time for me to get out. And one of the things about getting out, I said to myself, well, hell, if I'm in the way, if that's what people are now beginning to think, I'm in the way, I'm going to get out the way, let them see what they can do.
I actually had followed the Model Cities program nationally. Before I went into service, I was in Washington, D.C., so I was aware of sort of the emerging urban agenda, so I knew about the legislative history of model cities, but obviously I didn't know about the local program until I came back home.
Okay. At the time, the director was Jesse Nash. Talk to us about what your relationship was like with Jesse Nash.
I probably had what I would consider to be a normal or regular relationship with Jesse. Jesse hired me as the resources developer, so in effect, he was the person who brought me in. And Jesse was a great leader, a great people person, so he worked with people across the spectrum, and we worked, at least from my vantage point, we work well together. I would say that it's like kind of like apples and oranges, so to speak. Jesse was charismatic. He was a leader. He was a motivator. Probably the very best person I can think of to have been the first director of the Model Cities program. I would not characterize myself as much as the leader type, as more of a manager type in terms of overseeing the Model Cities program.
Oh, it was a lot of preparations because we had to have separate booths built for each of the programs. And then we had to convince each program that their program had to be unique and different. And so everyone tried to be very creative. So we got a lot of talented people there because we had the dancers from I can't remember the name of her program, but it was Gail Wells.
Black Dance Workshop?
Yes, the Black Dance Workshop. And any of those performers that we had, that we were funding their programs, they came and they performed. And so we had such outstanding participation, as well as the people who worked for those agencies to come in and try to be as creative as they could, so they could look different. And we gave prizes for those who looked different. Well, its purpose was to introduce our community to all of the programs, because not only were there health components and public safety, we had education, we had housing, we had a lot of different components, and all under those components were many programs. There were about 36 or 37 programs. And so what I wanted to do was introduce the community to all of those programs. I wanted to set up booths, and that's what I did at 1490 Jefferson. We had a big parade, and we all ended up at 1490. And each one of the programs had their staff there, in addition to the brochures, and talked about their programs. They signed up people for different services. They handed out little various trinkets from their program as reminders. And the community was just introduced to what we had to offer. We wanted to make sure they knew that we had all of these services available, because sometimes people just don't know. And so we operated this program for a full week, and the community came in from 9 to 8 o'clock at night. And so we had a tremendous outpour of people coming in and seeing that we were spending their money, because they were the taxpayers. Their tax dollars was being spent in the areas that we felt that they should have services. The ribbon cutting, which was a big to-do for us. The parade was phenomenal too, because we had so many people that wanted to participate, and so we drove down Jefferson Avenue through the neighborhood and gathered up everyone and brought them to 1490 Jefferson. The preparation, it took about 6 months to actually get everything ready for that event. It was a task. It was a task, but one that I really enjoyed.
And so the rumors concerning Frank Sedita's resignation are apparently confirmed. It's known that he has the Common Council votes to make Deputy Mayor Stan Mikowski his successor until his term expires at the end of the year. And now it's known that a new job for Frank Sedita, a state job, is probably only a matter of time.
Do you think Mayor Sedita's done a good job?
I think he's done a wonderful job. Yes, I have. Sorry to see him go.
I don't like him. I never did.
Why not?
Just because I think he's terrible.
It was yesterday that Buffalo Mayor Frank Sedita announced he was quitting on March 5th. And today, at a special meeting of the Common Council here, the city fathers in short order selected a successor, the expected successor, Deputy Mayor Stanley Makowski.
I hereby nominate for the appointment as mayor of Buffalo to succeed the Honorable Frank A. Sedita, who has resigned, the Honorable Stanley M. Makowski, residing at 83 Roosevelt Street, Buffalo, New York, effective as of March 5, 1973.
I cannot vote for Stanley Makowski because I do not feel that he is 1/10 as qualified as Chester C. Gorski.
Slomensky. Yes or no, Councilman? Volkert. Whalen. 11-2. Carried.
On March 5, I shall become the mayor of this great city. There will be changes made. At this time, I'm not prepared to make specific announcements. Whatever changes will be made with very deep and serious consideration for the future of this city.
Well, Bob Penn was a very bright, young, aggressive, ambitious former Vietnam veteran who had been honored by President Nixon as one of our future leaders. Bob came to us, and I don't remember exactly how he came or how he was interviewed or anything. I don't remember how Bob got on staff, but I do know that very shortly after Bob was on staff, he had begun to make it clear that he was oriented toward working with the existing political powers. That's the only way you're going to get anything done. You're batting the wind, thinking that you're going to be independent of them. The thing to do is to sort of make it clear that you understand that this is a political program and the policies of the political party in power will prevail. Bob's ambitions weren't too different than many of the other folks who we were working with, except for the fact Bob made it much more clear than most people who have been on our staff up to that point in time that he was going to be working very closely with Joe Triangle, that he was going to be working inside the Democratic Party, that he's going to be very much involved in supporting the Democratic Party and working for the Democratic. I wasn't working for the Democratic Party. I was working for the people in the model neighborhood area. But then Bob, can point out why you don't seem to understand how things are going. We've been in business 2 or 3 years before Bob came around. But his point of view was a very prominent point of view. His point of view was, if you are going to be in this game, then you got to be with the political powers. If you're going to get delivery, it's going to be based on the extent to which you are working with the political powers. Otherwise, you're just spinning wheels. But we got $5.3 million without them, 3 years in a row. We had a planning setup of citizen participants that got delivery of programs and projects without that particular approach. And I do realize that it was hard for many people. And with Bob coming in, as Bob did, I think he was able to influence folks that he had an inside track to the Democratic Party, and he could influence them in ways that I could not, because I wasn't about that. And he then, later on, was working very closely with Herb Bellamy. He and Herb Bellamy were the initiators of the Black Achievers Dinner, which you have seen. And that was simply whipping people into the Democratic Party, doing a marvelous job, and now it's just a regular program, is accepted in the community, and many people look forward to being honored by the Black Achievers. But at the early stage, Bob made it clear that he was interested in being a part of the political structure, so that he could benefit not just himself but others. He wasn't thinking about just Bob Penn, but he felt that being within the political structure, you'd be in better position to deliver than if you're outside of it. And God knows I was outside of it.
First of all, you have to be, at a minimum, bilingual. And by that I mean that if you talk the language that the mayor and the common council, in terms of what they understand, and then you have to go across the spectrum and try to communicate with the community. It takes a bilingual capacity to be able to essentially translate. That's what you really have to do. You have to kind of translate. So I worked for the mayor. I was a part of the mayor's team. The city council approved the appointment. We had to go to the council for approval of the program, and on a regular basis we had to report to the council, and on a regular basis I had to report to the community. So it was the best of times, and it was the worst of times, depending on what was going on.
Well, Jesse Nash, as a sociologist, a professor, he was a professor at Canisius College, and he came to us with a tremendous background in social needs. He was a tremendous organizer. He was able to convince all of us who worked for him to continue to work for him, because of course we didn't have these tremendous salaries that people have in most of these agencies. So we had limited resources, and he wanted to get as much mileage as he could from the dollars that we had. And so he was an excellent practitioner, and also an excellent mobilizer of people. And he was really, we followed him. We would follow him anywhere, because he was just that kind of a person that we knew he wanted to continue the programs, because he knew there was such a tremendous need, because he had been teaching that area to his students at Canisius for many years. After Dr. Nash left and went back to his teaching positions, the mayor then hired Bob Penn, who became our second director, who came to us from the city of Buffalo. Both men, both Jesse Nash as well as Bob Penn, and also David Eccles, who followed all the other two, were all Buffalonians. So, and myself as a Buffalonian. So we grew up in Buffalo, and we knew the landscape, we knew the people. Mr. Penn knew the individuals who controlled the dollars, who were the political people who could advocate on our behalf. He knew how also to mobilize people to get them to work on behalf of the community, and the community which he lived in, as well as myself, as well as Mr. Nash. And following Bob Penn was David Eccles, whose father was Reverend Eccles from Shiloh Baptist Church. Again, a Buffalonian, a person who knew this city, who grew up in this city, who was educated in this city, and followed in the footsteps of Bob Penn. He was his assistant. And so when Bob Penn left, he became the executive director. And again, having a wealth of knowledge about our needs. And all three gentlemen were very instrumental in keeping our program going for many years, because of what they brought to the table. They knew the social political structure of the city of Buffalo. They knew the social and political structure of New York State, and they could relate it to the federal government. And so that's how we ended up having as much as we had for as long as we had it.
First of all, there was some management issues and some management problems, but it was no different than in any startup effort. Whenever you start up, you have people who are not very sophisticated in all aspects, of business, of accounting, of management. So this was all new, and it was part of really building people's capacity. And so people made mistakes. I wouldn't single out any particular component. I would say that you had the health department, for example, the county health department operated a program, a Model Cities program. The Erie County Public Library operated the RAM Van, which was the Model Cities program. Those were more stable organizations. Then you had brand new organizations that had to become acquainted with accounting and other business principles. Some of them struggled, some of them were unsuccessful, and some of them didn't continue when we had to make tough choices.
And then the other aspect was probably the funding that was cut off by the federal government anyway, and they wanted to direct the money elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, and it was just a matter of other monies that come into the city take up sort of the mission of what Model Cities was all about.
The county cut back on the funds. At the same time, we built 608 William, and that was built with Model Cities funds. And what they did was they renamed 608 William the Jesse Nash Health Center, and they moved all of the services that was in that particular center into 608 William. Unfortunately, when you put lead in the walls because you have dental services, you can't remove these large sheets of lead for x-rays into other buildings. So we lost a lot of money by renovating that building. And that building is still set up as a health center, but it's being used for some other reasons at this point.
With Jessie Nash, Jesse and I had come through high school together, and so we had an understanding of each other. And he saw this as a program that really met the intents of the Model Cities program, that programs should come out of the community and their desires to improve themselves into a self-sufficiency program. And this was pretty much the way he carried the program. He really inspired us to try and go in those directions, and we appreciated his support. Later on, the political phase of the program, in which they wanted us to become supporters politically of the program of the political parties, and which in particular I couldn't do as a person because of my job, and Bob Penn represented that move after Jesse moved out. Jesse was more approaching the program from the standpoint of the community rather than from the standpoint of the political support of the parties. The community didn't really understand our purpose so often. While we had a board of directors and we had meetings almost monthly in which we invited the shareholders to come. Initially, maybe 40, 50 of them would show up, but then gradually they dropped down to the usual 5% that supports most organizations. You generally have 5% active, and then the rest are members, but they don't really get involved to the point that we felt that we were really representing the community. at the time, we were doing a fair amount of business, and I guess people spotted and saw that there was cash there and available, and we hadn't had any experience with this kind of thing. So the people came in and did the holdup. At the time, we had two women in the money counting area, the offices we had, and the guard was in the back. He didn't know the robbery was happening. So when he came out from the back, one of our clerks happened to scream, and that drew the attention of the robbers to look up into the mirror and saw him coming and shot him as he came down the aisle. Well, after that made the rest of our staff rather nervous, and they weren't particular, since this was not their livelihood, they were not particular about carrying on the operation. And I guess since it was not my livelihood, I didn't feel that I could ask somebody to volunteer their time or spend their time on something that was not a matter of life and death to them. When we closed, really, nobody lost anything on our closing. We were not able to return the shares because of state laws, but most of the people who have lost shares will only lost $5. So they didn't really lose anything, and they didn't support it enough to build up the shares.
I had been involved long before that. I was doing block clubs. I was involved with the Community Action Organization from the very beginning. You operate used to have to set up the Neighborhood Advisory Councils. I organized the first Neighborhood Advisory Council in the city, and it still exists, the Ellicott NAC. It was, that became sort of a mechanism through which we could use the community involved in issues. And I was on the stump. I was raising issues. And I was, we go out and motivate people and do demonstrations and get people excited about problems that are going on in the community. And somebody said, well, if you're going to be doing these things, you might as well run for public office. And I said, well, okay, let's try this. It was the New York State Senate. I ran for the Senate in 1972. I lost.
What was the experience?
Well, the experience wasn't very good, and here again, the Model Cities program was highly politically structured. So, and besides, there was a Hatch Act, which I would have been in violation had I continued to work. But I just didn't like the way, when I announced that I was going to run, they came to City Hall. They sent some of the black hatchet people off from City Hall to come down. It's okay, Collins. You got to turn your keys in. You can't run. You can't be in this agency. Just like that. Well, call me up. Let's talk about it. It could have been different. It could have been handled differently, but it was not. Bob Penn was involved in that, and some of the other people in City Hall who were political operatives for the Democratic Party at the time. But it was a good experience. I mean, I learned, and of course, I lost the election. Had a lot of fun. Met a lot of people. Spent a lot of money. It's a real good experience.
When we first started, we were naive enough to believe that we could go apolitical, that we did not want to get involved in the politics of the city. We did not want them interfering in our program. Well, if you don't have any money, you eventually fall into the realm of politics, because then you're really, the moment we attached ourselves to model cities, we became political. But we still fought against the idea that we would be politically oriented in terms of being persuaded by certain politicians to do certain things, and that we would eventually, if we had gotten our own self-sufficiency going, we would have been able to kind of subvert a lot of the impositions on the program. The center concept began to change. We had a new board set up. Some of the old board members who were, whose hearts were in the right place did not have the the ability to conceive of the center sustaining itself. And as a consequence, we had a little shift in board membership and leadership. And the leadership wanted to take the center in a different direction completely. And because they felt that, you know, the arts weren't going to sustain themselves, and that we needed to get other types of programs in, youth programs and social service programs to juxtapose against the arts.
This was a demonstration program. We had some successes and some failures. It was trial and error. It was a planning process to show that citizens could have some input in making decisions about the programs and the kinds of things that they'd like to see happen in their community and in their lives. So I would imagine that it's been a good learning process for all. Did in fact make an impact on the quality of life, that it did in fact give the city additional resources to address some of the inner city residents' problems, that it did in fact give people a hope to continue to survive. And now it's gone. I don't believe everyone prepared for it in the proper way. But how can you prepare for something that you don't feel that the federal government would ever do to a city or to a program or to a group of people that had considered that, you know, here's the government again coming to our rescue, which is the role of the government, and now it's gone.
The name changed from Model Cities, and it became the Division of Demonstration Projects, which was a part of the transition for it to become mainstream. So the Model Cities name started to gradually disappear, but a lot of the functions and what Model Cities was about continued, you know, under other programs or another name. And in fact, that was part of the intended purpose for it to blend in. It shouldn't even be the Model Cities program. It ought to be what all citizens in all neighborhoods come to expect. You shouldn't have to have a special designation to have good services or to be treated decently.
We tried to make it clear to the elected officials we weren't trying to undercut them. We weren't trying to displace them. We wanted to have an opportunity to make our own mistakes. We wanted to have an opportunity to show that we could deliver. And the fear was we were really going to deliver. I remember in the Jitney, for example, the Common Council went through a process of asking me, well, how much money do you really need? And I can't tell you on camera just how we did this thing, because that would give us away some important strategic planning techniques. But in any event, they thought they had stopped the Jitney. They thought they had put us out of business. But they gave us enough money to buy 6 jitneys. They didn't understand that. They didn't understand it. The next thing they knew, those orange jitneys were out there on the road and were moving. It gave some people hope. It allowed some people to gain skills in planning, skills in diplomacy, setting up workshops and seminars. It allowed some people to gain inside tracks to the political structure. It was something that made some people realize that we could do things that we hadn't done before if given the impetus to do them. Some people were very much impressed that, well, now Model Cities has shown us that we can do some things. I hear from some people right now to this day, you and I sitting here right now, and I can get a phone call from somebody who felt that they had benefited greatly from Model Cities, the Model Cities experience. We had employed large number of people, or helped people get employment over the years. How many people got lasting employment was another story. That's a measure of the success of any program. But the people who benefited from the program in many different ways, mainly in terms of operative skills. And unlike the CAO, who had people in it that thought we were going to try to run them out of business, the CAO, when it started as an Office of Economic Opportunity Program under Lyndon Johnson, was supposed to be guided by maximum feasible citizen participation. They're institutionalized now. I don't know whether citizen participation is still a very important consideration, but they managed to do the right things politically. That's what's important, and they're still around. Model cities doesn't exist anywhere in any city.